Welcome back to the Reboot Show. I'm Sally A. Illingworth, your host, and today I'm here and I'm excited to be having a conversation about technology and transport. I'm here with Ian, who is a transport expert and the Managing Director of iMOVE Australia. We've got Larissa Rose, who is a renewable fuels, environmental sustainability and biofuels expert and the Director of Glowing Green Australia. And we've got Luke Stow, who is our expert resident technology panelist at the Reboot Show. So welcome, guys.
Hi, Sally.
Hello.
I'd love to hear from you first, Ian. I'd love to hear your thoughts on maybe some of the biggest changes that you've seen in the transport industry in recent years.
Yeah, thanks, Sally. Transport's actually undergoing a quiet revolution. 10 years ago, when things were on the move, they were pretty much invisible. But these days, everybody's got a smartphone and half the trucks have got telemetry. So we've emerged into an era where actually we can see things while they're moving. And if we can see them, then there's a good chance we can make them move better. So we're seeing a big trend towards improving traffic flows, improving fleet management, improving people's journey options as being the major change that's happening in the transport sector.
So we've moved to a more customer-centric, if you like, focus in terms of how those transport models are changing?
Absolutely. So because when you go to work and you go by train, do you do it because you like the train or because you just need to get to work? If you're going to your aunt's place, is it because you like driving the car or actually it's because you want to get to a destination? So the journey is important. And because we can now see the journeys, there is the possibility and the incentive to change the transport system so that it focuses on delivering you a good journey rather than worrying about buses and trains as individual systems.
And thanks for that, Ian. And from a fuel standpoint, Larissa, or even just more generally environmental sustainability standpoint, what have you seen change in that space? So to Ian's point about how we do transport ourselves, that's changing. So what have we seen from an environmental sustainability perspective and what that means?
Yeah, there's been a lot of involvement, I guess, from that consumer perspective. And that's really around the capabilities of the vehicles and the transport that we use now. Now, technology advancement has definitely driven the capacity for us to really build in that more renewable bio dialogue. Obviously, vehicles have the ability now to have a little bit more of a green tick on them. And what that means is obviously the electrification of vehicles, but also the capacity for advanced or more renewable fuels to be a part of the fuel mix. So when we do travel and consumers do decide to drive from A to Z, there's an option and availability now that wasn't more so 10 years ago, but is evident now that we can start using, lower carbon fuels, even though we may not have an electric vehicle, but we can use that. So we're seeing that technology advancement in vehicles, creating that opportunity for consumers to be able to use transport along those lines.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating. And sorry, Ian, go for it.
In fact, the transport sector is responding to two problems simultaneously. One problem is congestion, and whether that's congestion on the roads or on the trains, it's congestion. And the other problem is greenhouse gases. And so we're all looking for ways in which for solutions that will deliver us a benefit in both directions. So better flow, less greenhouse gases, better journey outcomes.
And what would you say are maybe some of the things, and Luke, you may have some thoughts on this from a technology standpoint, even if we were to consider, for example, basic technology applications. What are some of the things that are driving some of those changes, for example, with helping to improve congestion from a technology standpoint? So if we consider the likes of maybe an Uber, just basic things like that are helping to better manage transport.
Well, I think Ian touched on something really important, which is the interface and people having mobile phones. This concept in 5G, Internet of Things, coupled with wearables, we're seeing things in glasses, we're seeing things in watches, in all types of devices. I can only see that improving that human interface. And we talked about cars just a moment ago. I can see a stage where a car is communicating much more with you about the range it can travel, the type of fuel consumptions it's using, and perhaps even, optimizing the route because of wanting to optimize both the the vehicle sustainability and the use of fuel. I mean, thoughts, Ian? Where do you see it going?
Yeah, so, all of the above, plus the new technology is delivering also some additional modes of transport. So Brisbane is now well practiced at using electric scooters. All Australian cities are well practiced at using Uber. So some of them are physical technologies and others are digital technologies, but both of those things, they're both new technologies that are helping improve people's travel options. And then we need another layer of journey planning technology on the top to help people choose between the options they have to get the best journey they can. And potentially the best journey might for them be actually also the least polluting journey.
And I think that leads into an interesting conversation, Larissa, in terms of, say, with these technology advancements. And I think I would say personally that as travelers, if you like, we're becoming more mindful and more sort of conscious about the travel decisions we make. It's maybe not as passive as it once was because we do have further insight into sort of the decisions we're making and more capabilities. So Larissa, would you say that maybe some of these technology transformations that are happening in the transport space, does that maybe help us to become more conscious travelers from an environmental sustainability standpoint because we maybe better understand the dynamics of transport?
Yeah, for sure. And I think there's a couple of different levers that sort of pull on there on that one. Obviously, we've got that market, consumers can drive the market, consumer demand for bio or more economy, like, as Ian said, more conscious of the fact, well, hey, probably like we drove all the time in the 80s and 90s, maybe we should start using rail or, things like that, or doubling up our goods and services that we're using now to be able to double up in transport. And that's, a lot of blockchain stuff. But I think a big part of that push is market, obviously understanding there's a demand for producing products that have the capabilities to reduce emissions at the tailpipe, but also do the other levers of being able to consume and use products, whether that's engine advancement technologies, whether that's electrification or a 100% biofuel option engine that can deliver that green tick, because there's a myriad of different types of energy matrices in every single country around the world. So certain countries have the capabilities to electrify quite easily and effectively. So that market push and demand can sit there because of infrastructure, whereas there are other parts, given a little bit like Australia, we have big long haul issues on how we get around, is that we still dependent on a liquid fuel to some degree because we need that energy intensity to get where we have to get to. So there's an opportunity for, different types of biofuels and renewable fuels to be a part of it. But generally, yeah, we're just seeing a massive progression, whether people are doing it from the points Ian said, simplicity and speed, but also from an environmentally conscious, understanding that about 27% of the global emissions in the world come from transportation, and that is substantial. So we definitely need to decarbonize that in some way, shape or form, whether that's removing our dependency on individually driving cars all the time and doubling up with trains and buses, or creating, more passenger car fleet options that are better for the environment.
And I think certainly that if you consider the ride sharing industry and how that's grown in recent years, I think that's certainly a sign that things are changing. And, if you look at, say, applications like Uber, for example, and they've even started to incorporate that ride sharing, fleet sharing model to sort of, play their role, if you like, in terms of making transport more economical, but also environmentally sustainable. To your point, Larissa, about fuels and whatnot, now I'm no expert in this space, but I'd love one of you to kick off and maybe speak about the role of hydrogen in the future for transport.
Yeah, Ian, you definitely articulated that well before. So how about you start it, and then I can talk about what that means from an energy matrix perspective as well.
Yeah, thanks, Sally. So we're finding a lot of people in industry in Australia are now looking to the future fuel source that they're going to use to run their fleets of trucks. And they're looking around and seeing that, so all of our diesel's imported, and there are issues floating around in that space. And so there's a lot of new interest in alternative fuel sources. And so to all the ones that Larissa has been talking about, But hydrogen has a particular attraction because when you burn hydrogen as a fuel, all it produces is water. So it's environmentally just a beautiful solution. And hydrogen can be generated by harnessing solar energy in its production. So Australia's got a fair bit of that too. So there's a lot of interest around the nation in looking at hydrogen as a possible solution, alternative, a resolution to our fuel security problem.
I like the use of the word resolution. Larissa?
Yeah, yeah, and I think because we've seen quite a huge spike, like road transport is very significant in Australia, given our geographical location and being able to move. It's a backbone of moving goods and services around the country. And we've still seen an increasing in the demand for diesel fuel use, which is what the fuel that is needed for heavy trucks, you know, B doubles and all of the rest of the doubles that add onwards, and also our mining and, you know, the construction sector. So, and they're parts of the backbone of the economy of Australia, and we need to understand that diesel fuel use is going up, and obviously we have quite high importation rates for fuel and crude oil into our country. We're up to about 96% importation. So we need to look at what those alternatives are. And obviously hydrogen has the capabilities, because on the other end of it, it can be produced as renewable, because that's the difference. Sometimes you can create an alternative, but the whole life cycle analysis of it might be quite carbon intensive. So it's just as equally equivalent to the fossil fuel version. So hydrogen is an amazing opportunity as a part of an overarching mix of different types of fuels that we can use in this country. And especially more so, as I said, because we are heavily reliant on heavy transport trucks and all of those kind of, you know, types of mining and construction vehicles.
Perhaps if I could expand on that. I mean, Australia is known for its mining expertise, and it in fact delivers, you know, an awful lot of minerals to the global economy. But mining is a very energy intensive process. You've got to break rocks, and you've got to carry rocks around and ship them around the world. So the mining industry in particular is interested in whether does it make sense to use hydrogen as the primary energy source for mining operations. Now, because mining is remote, it's operated on diesel, but it's possible in Australia, where we have lots of sunshine, that it might be possible to actually produce hydrogen at on or close to a mine, and then for the mine to actually use the hydrogen and potentially sell some of it outside the gate into the transport sector that's actually serving the mine as well. So there's a possibility that mining could strongly drive the sort of early adoption of hydrogen as a useful fuel in the Australian economy.
And that's brilliant. Sorry, Ian, I'll commend you on that last part, because it's not going away. Like, we have to have it. We don't have a transport infrastructure where we can quickly and easily catch trains to the Central Australia and Queensland and get to Northern Territory like a lot of other European countries do. So we are reliant on some way and shape and form on heavy transport and moving our goods and services. And mining is the backbone of this country, and it always will be. We will be heavily reliant on that. So why would we not, and why would those industries not want to be progressive? Because that's long-term sustainability for the viability of their industry and sector, being able to secure fuel sources and a different mix of different fuel sources. So yeah, absolutely. It seems like a no-brainer. So that's so well said, Ian.
I'm interested in data, like, you know, and we had a conversation in the lead up to today's panel, and you were talking about data is the secret sauce. I imagine for you too, Larissa, in your field, data is secret sauce as well. What are some of the things that you're seeing that are enabling, you know, transport to become more effective and more sustainable from a data point of view? Are there tools that you're seeing? You mentioned blockchain before, Larissa. What are the practical uses here for technology?
Yeah, so I mean, data, you know, in our industry and sector, it's all really around the importation of, and how much energy are we using in this country, and then even more respective to liquid fuels and the consumption of that. So obviously we're really relying on our importation, the data that comes from our importation, because that causes that can help us identify that data for importing crude oil. If there's geopolitical and gaps within our industry that could make our country quite vulnerable, because we are heavily reliant. So it's very important that we have that data, that importation, the Australian petroleum fuel statistics, and that data is coming through every quarter to be able to determine, and a lot of companies be able to determine their purchasing of fuel and the amount of fuel and the fuel availability in the country. And that's really basic 101 sort of data work. And then being able to articulate what part of that, you know, data comes from the matrix of that. So like for an example, which is sort of off, but it's similar, like with energy, if we're talking about wanting to create renewable electricity for these amazing vehicles that we have the capabilities now to electrify, we are only sort of sitting somewhere at about 24% of our electricity, you know, portfolio. 24% of that is only renewable, and the other 70% is from fossil fuels. So, you know, that data is important for us to be able to analyze and make an understanding. Well, how much capability do we have to be able to electrify all these vehicles, and how much do we have to be able to do that from a renewable perspective? Because there's always that argument, it's all well and good, you've got an electrified vehicle, but if it's still coming from fossil fuels and we're still reliant and we're using lots of coal to be able to create electricity, which is that 76%,
Yes.
you know, like where are we going? Like, how do we make some, you know, decisions around sustainability of transport?
Yeah. Yeah.
I think Larissa makes a really important point there, that if you're going to improve something, you have to measure it.
Yeah.
And to measure it, you need to generate some data. And so whether it's measuring our energy consumption, or whether it's measuring the flow of people and vehicles, or whether it's predicting the arrival of the box and the goods, they are all processes that we badly want to improve. And so we need to measure. And the great thing about this decade is that we now have ways to measure. We can see the goods while they're traveling, so that by using the position data on the goods, we can make a prediction about when they're going to arrive. And so, you know, that means that scheduling can be improved. It means that planning can be improved. It means that less goods are tied up in stock in transit. So that's less working capital, more economic efficiency, just from making better use of the data in the transport chain to improve the transport process.
And so with this sort of increase in volume, if you like, and sort of the diversity of the sets of data that sort of, you know, we can now collect, and that's a growing space for transport. I'd love to hear from you, Luke, particularly within the context of thinking about, you know, the future of technology and what that means for smart living and smart cities. Like, what could technology companies be thinking about in the context of having access to more data from the transport sector, and then maybe how they can leverage that to their advantage for innovations and whatnot?
I think this is a massive part of the conversation. You know, if you think about all the devices that we're now talking about that are going to be in not only cities, but in urban, in rural areas as well. You know, we're talking about satellite type of communication now from 5G. I was reading something about that last week, where, you know, rural areas will have much better access to 5G type capabilities. So this then broadens the scope here of the amount of devices that are feeding data back into somewhere, and someone has to be collating all that information and looking at it. I mean, one of my favorite sayings is we're data rich but insight poor, and I think that's just going to be more meaningful moving forward, because we want to consolidate. We want to be able to have access to people to data, like, for example, Ian, from a transport point of view, and helping people move around more effectively and more efficiently in logistics, and Larissa from a sustainability point of view, accessing those same data pools. So I think technology companies are going to really think about how this becomes available, you know, particularly for government agencies and for scientists and for people doing research. I think this is going to be really a crucial issue. And we're seeing also that there are concerns about privacy. So if most of this is coming from your mobile phone or your wearable or your car that's connected to you more than ever, I think privacy and cybersecurity are going to come into this as well, and that's probably going to be a concern for regulators.
That's something I'd love to touch on anyone's got some thoughts on it in terms of, you know, as we are collecting more data, if you think about sort of macro government concerns and just the privacy around that. One, because I think that data can become quite valuable, I can imagine, to governments in terms of making decisions around resource allocation and whatnot. And also, you know, maybe where they develop certain things and all that sort of stuff. But as to Luke's point, there actually there are many sort of privacy concerns. Now that we do have the capability to collect more data around our transport systems.
There's a whole bunch in there.
Yeah.
Let me just hit on a couple of points that I think are really pertinent to Luke's observations. So first is, there's already quite a lot of data around, but the trouble is it's all in different languages and it sits in different silos, and we're really not very good at passing messages from one silo to another. So that requires really quite urgently work on, I'm going to say, data standards, or at least definitions. So when I say a truck and Larissa says a truck, we're both talking about the same thing. Whereas Larissa's probably talking about a B double, and I'm actually talking about a little white van that's delivering my groceries. You know, so we have to get a grip on data definition, data standards, so that when we share information, it actually means the same thing at both ends of the conversation. We also have to get better at sharing information. So at the moment, you know, each transport company has a lot of data. They know where their trucks are. They know what the trucks are delivering. But does anybody else know? No, they don't. So we have to evolve a mechanism by which we can actually share at least a minimum amount of data. And then that takes us to the whole question about privacy and what is personal data and what is not. And so you and I would all like to have easier transport, better journeys. And we want our journeys start from the front door and they end up at some nice destination. And it's likely to comprise a bit of walking, a bit of driving, maybe a train or a bus somewhere. So there's a whole raft of data that we need access to. But for the system to provide a service to give us a good journey experience, they actually need to see what we want. So there's an absolute need for the system to intensify its dialogue with you and me to better understand what we're trying to do, where we're trying to get to, in order that they then provide a better service or a better option than was the case before. So that challenges this discussion around privacy, because notwithstanding that private information is private and must be respected as such, at the same time, for you and I to get a better result out of the transport system, we need actually to share more of our information with the system in order for the system to then make use of it to deliver us a better result.
And I think to that point, Ian, you know, there's a case to be made in the context of, you know, wanting travellers, if you like, to become more environmentally conscious around their transport decisions, because I think, you know, in today's day and age, it would be safe to say, and Larissa, correct me if I'm wrong, but that, you know, the average consumer probably wants to do their best to contribute better to, you know, environmental situations, just because we are more aware of maybe some of the challenges in that space. So would you say it's similar from an environmental standpoint, that by having access to certain data, even at a consumer level, around maybe what environmental implications your transport decisions have, then you can actually become more conscious of that and make better decisions?
Yeah, well, you can, that's, so relative, because you can take that data, that overarching macro data, and bring that down a really micro specific level of what that would mean to me in my household consumer, you know, what transport is and how much transport and carbon intensity from my, you know, walk of path that I've done this year, my carbon footprint, what that means. So being able to collate that data and bring that down in terms to what that means, whether you're going to jump on a train and you're going to do, if you did equivalent, you know, sat on a train and did your transport, you know, on a train for the whole year, or whether you did that on a bus, or whether you decided to do that running on your car with E10 fuel, being able to kind of, if there was some sort of form of app and data that just showed that, so you could see equivalently, oh, well, this is how much carbon intensity I've contributed to it because I did it on a train, or I do it on a bus, or if I do it in my car or my electrified car. That's really valuable, because then that comes to a sense of personal ownership and contribution to the impact of what we have, our reliancy on transportation. So yeah, absolutely. And in reflection to the previous question where Ian was saying, you know, it's one of those things on aggregating and getting all that data across and not having 20,000 different silos across the world, is that we need really clear definitions around what the word truck means, or heavy range truck, or, you know, and all that sort of stuff, because what it means to you and what it means to me and what it means to different industries and sectors is very, very different. And you can't have that when you got data, because it makes the data quite grey. So you need to have specific definitions, like you do with any kind of policy or regulations, that actually make you understand what the word truck means or medium passenger car fleet vehicle or something like that. So,
and in terms of developing maybe some of those that standardization around definitions, who do you believe plays the biggest role there? Is that just a collaboration between key stakeholders? Is industry, for example, involved in that process? Is it government?
So there is already a quite active dialogue, I would say led by the federal government through its National Freight and Supply Chain Strategy, discussing with industry players in the transport sector what data definitions we can adopt, because it has to work for both sides. It has to work for the data collection process, and it has to work for the data generators, which are, to a large measure, the operators of trucks and buses and trains and the like. So there is a process underway. It takes quite a bit of time and effort to get resolution on these questions, but it is happening. It's being led by the Commonwealth, and or I say all power to their right arm. We need to encourage that process to the max.
Being a technologist, and one of the things I consider in this conversation is technology is moving quickly, and also in sustainability. Are we going to be able to keep up from a policy and government perspective with the speed of this technology, or is it moving too fast for us to contemplate some of these rules and regulations?
The amount of data that's being generated is increasing rapidly, and you might say, well, no, are we going to drown in data? But that's not really the way the world works. The point is the data is generated, and people who can will use that data to develop some insights and to make a different decision and invest in something new. And so the process goes on. So it's much more driven by opportunities, people seeing opportunities for themselves and for their organization in using the data to do better and different in order to take their business, their process, their service, to take it forward to a higher level. So that process won't stop, but nor should we fear it, because it's actually what drives the development of standards of living and economic productivity in the country. So, which is that's the bit we aim for.
Yeah. I want to shift gears here for a second, because I think it's something that we can't ignore talking about. But I'd love to hear maybe from yourself first, Larissa, in terms of how COVID and the pandemic situation has not only impacted transport, but what does that actually mean from an environmental perspective?
Yeah, there's this interesting discussion piece that's happened through COVID for everybody generally has seen from an environmental perspective, the reduction in aeroplanes flying in our atmosphere, the reduction of boats not being in harbours and waterways as much anymore, and the reduction obviously with air quality. So we've seen that all the way through from the Himalayas. There's been prolific amount of photos of how in Venice now you can see the bottom of now you can see the sludge on the bottom, the sludge not mixed in the water. And that's just a sludge thing. That's not really like a big environmental change. But, a lot of people have been asking that question around, well, because of the reduction in impact on us sitting and being in cars and vehicles, has that helped the environment? Well, from a carbon output perspective, no, it's not going to be neither here nor there or anything. Obviously, there's been a greater dependency on other shipping and aviation for transporting goods and services around the world. That's definitely stepped up. So we don't see that there's any, and we as in the whole, my industry and sector, see any major deliverable and outcome as in, well, just because we had COVID for 3 months, that means that we've been saving the world and the earth. Now, we may, from the position of less carbon emissions and particulate matter in the air in the cities, that's definitely a huge value add. Air quality standards are much better. But if we're talking about the other side of logistics and freight, I know Ian will be able to provide some good commentary on the COVID impact value,
which has been huge. So, and interestingly, it's sort of quite different in the transport of goods compared to the transport of people. So I don't know if you've been to a railway station any time recently, but the trains go past and there's hardly anybody on them. So public transport as a principal means of people moving around has diminished importance as people sense or perceive an infection risk. And additionally, people are not traveling into the center of the city so much. So the transport networks for people are substantially empty, and even the roads are enjoying quite a respite from the usual peak hour congestion. On the other hand, in the freight transport, it's all upside. Trucks are much more productive now than they were because they don't get caught up in traffic jams. They're making the delivery times are much quicker, much more reliable. So at the big end of town, the freight sector is doing very well. And of course, because people are staying at home and ordering online, the last mile delivery process to get it from the shop to your home is just booming. Yeah. So yes, there's been a huge impact on transport, but it actually, the type of impact varies from sector to sector.
And I think to your point, Ian, Luke, I know we've had this discussion briefly before, sort of thinking about that concept of mid-COVID, what's the impact on central business districts and their existence post-COVID if everyone's sort of dispersing themselves and working remotely and whatnot. And I'm mindful of time, but maybe to kickstart sort of wrapping this up, Luke, I'd love to hear your thoughts. I know on a segment before you've said that autonomous vehicles will be safer than my driving personally, but
I did say that. Yeah.
From a technology standpoint, what are you excited about with the future of transport and what that looks and feels like?
Oh, look, I'm sort of coming at it from a consumer point of view and listening to both Larissa and Ian today. I'm quite excited. I mean, I think that, data for the use of better transport systems for us as humans and helping us with our adjusted lifestyles after COVID is going to be really quite critical, particularly within Australia, where we've got these large open spaces. Anything we can do to optimize that transport and also make it more sustainable, I think will be quite exciting from a consumer point of view. And I can only see that sort of benefiting us in the future.
Yeah. And in closing, Larissa, what are you most excited about when it comes to the future of transport? And I can imagine particularly from an environmental perspective.
Yeah, I'm excited about the capacity for renewable fuels. So just to help the audience, renewable fuels are fuels that are produced from renewable resources. So they are able to do it again and use it. It's forever there. So, and that really sits with engine technology and advancement. There are many different OEMs now that are looking at their, version of having electrified vehicles, but they've still got the fuel variety for long haul distance range, which is what we need here in Australia. We need both of those because if you're going all the way through to Darwin to transport goods and services from Brisbane, you can't electrify the whole way. So there's that really exciting capabilities. There's a couple of great OEMs that are doing that work now. And the ability for, renewable fuels to be able to advance. Excited for engine technologies now have lower emissions at the tailpipe and the future of that and what that means as well, which in turn helps socio-economically with our health and air quality standards. And I'm also excited to know now that the federal government are looking at our fuel quality standards, because in Australia, we've actually had pretty dirty fuel comparative to the rest of the world. So,
sorry,
you know, that
ask Larissa, is there a specific reason as to why that's the case?
it's been a cost metric thing as well. It costs a lot more to refine the fuel to be cleaner, to have less sulfur in it. And we've had very high sulfur fuels here in Australia comparative to other countries around the world. We've sat, you know, in the top 10 of the highest, dirtiest fuels in the world, which you totally would not think. You would associate that with a, you know, undeveloped country. So, and that pressure point for the federal government to make change on that was really technology advancement with Euro 6 spec vehicles coming into this country, and them not being able to deliver and fulfill what that vehicle could do at the tailpipe due to the fact that the fuel going in it was dirty fuel. And dirty not as in like it's got clumps and lumps and stuff in it, but that's just in reference to the sulfur and the particulates when it burns, and what that means at the tailpipe as well. So that's good to see that pressure point coming down, and that's technology and market demand pushing and changing regulations here in Australia.
Yeah, that's very exciting. Ian, what are you most excited about?
What excites me is the changing focus in the transport system towards delivery of goods and delivery of people to destination, and that brings with it a merging of across silos. So whereas before we ran buses and we ran a train system and we ran ferries in Sydney and the like, and we ran a road system that was in a way all seen as separate parts of the piece, now they're becoming part of one large transport system that has as its aspiration good journeys and reliable deliveries, and that's all fed by a much higher level of data generation, data availability. So we see this sort of emergence of system thinking, of a holistic approach to transport as being a really important driver of community benefit, personal opportunity, and economic productivity for the nation.
Right.
Brilliant. And to use your word, Ian, this has been a very holistic conversation, I feel, and I hope you guys have enjoyed it as much as I have, and I'm sure the audience will as well. Thank you very much, Ian, Larissa, and Luke, for joining us on the Reboot Show today. To the audience, please do make sure that you subscribe to our YouTube channel, and we will see you on the next segment. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.